Welcome back, guys. On this video, we're going to be going over what camera our photographers are using in 2020 and why specifically we chose this camera, because it is a lot different than what others will recommend. So if you search best cameras for real estate photography, more than likely a bunch of people are going to tell you need a Sony a7 III or equivalently expensive camera. And while I agree that this is an absolutely fantastic camera, does great video shoots, great photos, the results with our process are the same if we use this camera or if we use a much cheaper camera. Specifically, the much cheaper camera that we're using is the Canon M50 with a Canon 11-22 EFM lens. This entire kit comes in new at about $1,000. The lens itself is $399 and the camera is about $599 depending on where you buy it. Now, we chose this camera for a couple of reasons. One, it shoots great video, but it's still really cheap. So the cameras before that we used were the Canon 6D, and while that shot great photos, it didn't have great video, and so we had to have multiple setups. So what we'd end up doing is having our videographers using an a7 III and those just shooting photos using a Canon 6D. But both of these camera setups were pretty expensive, and so as our company continued to grow, we were looking for a lower cost option that still produced great results, and that's when one of our students mentioned the Canon M50. Now, we initially bought this camera with no intentions of actually using it for our photographers at Norman & Young, but in our testing, we found it to be really, really good, and so we started considering that we may actually be able to switch everybody to this and eliminate the need for two different setups and a much more expensive setup. Even with the Canon 6Ds that we were using in 2019, it was still about $2,000 for a setup, where this is half that price and a third of the price of the a7 III. So as I mentioned a second ago, we were using two different setups depending on if that person was going to be shooting video or just photos. And the reason we did that is because we historically did not have a lot of video jobs. But as our company continued to grow, we noticed that more and more people were ordering videos, and that videos became a higher percentage-based ordering, meaning in the past, maybe 10% of our projects had video, but it slowly crept from 10 to 20 to 30, and now I'd say about 30% of our projects have video. And so at that point, it either became that we had to buy a ton of a7 IIIs, which we started doing the math there, and it was going to be tens and tens of thousands of dollars to outfit all of our photographers. And right at that same time, like I said, we were testing the M50 for one of our students. So the choice became clear, and we decided to go with M50s for everybody. We've now used the M50s for about 6 months, so it wasn't the entirety of 2020, but for the last 6 months, which gives me enough data to give you guys sort of the pros and cons and what we've noticed between the two cameras. So first things first, the image quality on these two cameras are very similar once they've gone through the editing process. The nice thing about shooting real estate is that you don't need a super high quality image at the start, and even if you do have one, the resulting product is not going to be different between these two cameras. So I know a lot of people will say that's crazy, but if you actually look at our process, both our HDR and our hand blended route, the images are very much the same. And because we only charge our agents sometimes around $155 for a photo shoot, we don't need to buy expensive cameras, especially when maybe this is 3% better, there's not a big difference. Now, I will put a disclaimer in here and say that I like shooting with this camera better. It feels better in your hands, it's a higher quality camera, and so that's definitely one of the pros that I'd give this camera, is it just feels good, the buttons are elevated, they're easy to get to, the display is large and high quality, and I'm already used to Sony settings menu, so it kind of makes sense. But overall, this camera does feel a lot more professional, and it does have a higher build quality. But that being said, the only thing as a business owner that I'm really interested in is the resulting work that it produces and how our clients like that work. And I'm happy to report that once we switched from higher quality cameras to these M50s, not only does our work look just about the same, I think the colors coming out of the M50, honestly, in my opinion, look better. There's more definition between colors, but that's sort of anecdotal and there's no way to define that. But overall, the images look the same, and the most important part is none of our clients have said anything or even noticed the difference. And on top of that, we were able to spend tens of thousands of dollars less by outfitting everybody with this and achieve the goal of getting everybody with an all-in-one photo and video setup. So starting with the pros of the Canon M50 is of course the very cheap cost, and one of the reasons why we first started testing this camera. And the thing we like about this too is when someone's just starting, they just became a real estate photographer, they often don't want to spend a ton of money on gear, so it's really nice for us to be able to tell our students this is the camera you need and it's not gonna break the bank. So besides the cost, the other good thing about this camera, and of course this is the reason that made it so we could use it, is the photo and video quality is really good. It's not perfect, it's not as good as the a7 III, but realistically it produces a quality product that is just about in line with what the a7 III produces. Now, there are definitely some cons of this camera. One, it's tiny and it feels a little bit like an amateur camera. It's got a plastic body, the buttons are kind of sunk in and hard to get to. The menus are alright, they're pretty intuitive, but I like the Sony menus better, and overall it just feels like a cheaper camera. But the good thing is, like I said in the pros, the result doesn't look like a cheaper camera, so overall we really like this camera, and it's why we have our photographers at Norman & Young use it. And last thing about this camera specifically is, I kind of mentioned this with saying the buttons are sunk in, but the buttons are really small. So if you're someone that has really small hands, it'll be great. If you have big fingers, you'll find yourself hitting 2 or 3 buttons at a time. Not a big deal, but something that does get a little irritating if you're using this day in and day out, like many of our photographers and many of our students do. Now to the pros and cons of the A7 III. So starting with the pros here, this camera has intensely high build quality. It feels like metal. Some of the parts are metal. It shoots really great video, even at really high ISO, which is something the M50 will separate itself from. If you start pushing ISO well past 1,000, you're gonna notice a lot more noise in the M50 footage. I've shot a house on 10,000 ISO on this thing before, and the footage was not very noisy at all. It was definitely usable, which is ridiculous. And that's one of the things that the Sony cameras, the mirrorless cameras, but especially those mirrorless made by Sony, are known for. They have really, really good low light performance. So that is definitely a benefit. Photo quality wise, the photo quality is obviously super great, but like I mentioned, there's not a big difference between this and the M50 when it comes to the finished product, so I'm not really going to list that as a pro in this case, just because the finished product is almost identical. Now, one more thing that I really like about this camera is the buttons are easy to hit, they're spaced out nicely, and it has a really convenient scroll wheel here to look through your images. On the M50, you have to actually hit the button over and over to get through your images. Now, onto the cons here. The main con, and really the only con to me of this camera, is the price. If you get this together, the body itself is $2,000 and the lens is about $1,000. So you're looking at a $3,000 kit, whereas this thing is $1,000 for the entire thing. So if you have the money and if you want a really high level professional feeling camera, this is definitely the camera to go with. And one more thing I'd like to add, that if you shoot other types of work besides real estate, you shoot video for, maybe you shoot commercials for companies or you shoot weddings, this is definitely the camera to go with if you're doing a lot more video work. But if you're just shooting real estate, I don't really see a purpose in this. I don't see that it's worth the cost, and that's why we recommend and outfit our photographers with the M50. With that in mind, I want to talk about something that's really one of the cornerstones of our course and what we teach our students, and that's the fact that you should not be wasting money on expensive gear, especially if it doesn't make a difference in your business. You know, one thing I've noticed is that a lot of photographers don't get where they want to get because they're focused on absolutely the wrong things. They spend all their time focusing on gear, and they spend all their time learning about new gear and how to use that new gear better, but they don't actually just learn the skills and get better, period, regardless of the piece of gear. And that's something I think is really unfortunate because it is one of the things that will stop you from growing your business. When I started my business, I knew nothing about cameras and I knew nothing about a lot of the YouTubers, camera review stuff. I didn't know anything about that, and so I didn't focus on it. I focused on the business side of my business, and that's why I have the company that I do today. It's because I've not been focusing historically on which piece of gear is better. I test it, but I leave it at that, and I go with what is the most economical solution for my company based upon what's going to create a product our clients like and what's going to just waste money. And so, well, I think that there definitely is a place for the A7 III. If you're someone that's operating, you know, a single person business and you just really like high quality gear, by all means, go for this. Business isn't something that you shouldn't enjoy at all. So if you enjoy high quality gear, the A7 III is an awesome tool that will really help you in your business. That being said, if you don't and you just feel like you need to buy the A7 III to get anywhere, that is absolutely not true. This is an absolutely great camera, the M50. It's a great starter camera because it's cheap, but it's also a great camera that will be able to help you grow your business with. Like I said, we use this, all of our photographers use the M50, and that's not because we can't afford the A7 III, it's because we know that it's not going to generate better results for our business. So overall, one thing I want to leave you with is, before you buy a piece of gear, always ask yourself, are you buying this for yourself, for fun, and for something you're going to enjoy? And if that's the case, buy it. But if you're buying a piece of gear that's more expensive than another option because you think it's going to help your business, I almost always will tell you, and I almost always will recommend, that it will not help your business like you think, and it is not worth spending the money. There's a saying in business that cash is oxygen, and that is absolutely true. Your business needs oxygen to keep running, so don't waste that cash, don't waste that oxygen on something that's not going to help your business grow, especially if you're at a critical stage in your business where you're just starting or you don't have much cash or things have been slower lately. Don't waste your money on stuff that's not going to push your business forward. Spend your money where it counts in your business. Don't waste your money on gear you don't need. Put that effort and put that money into bettering yourself as a business owner, maybe learning more business skills rather than buying more camera gear. That's always going to take you farther. If you want more videos like this, of course, hit the subscribe button. We have a bunch of stuff coming that I think you're really going to like. Other than that, that's all for this video, guys. I'll see you in the next one.